Folks, hello and welcome to Tavern Chat. I am your host, Eric Tenkar, your bartender in the OSR, your main proprietor at the Tenkar's Tavern blog. Please, if you haven't yet, subscribe to tenkarstavern.substack.com. Otherwise, if you missed the original live stream that wasn't on this channel, but I'm sure it's going to be Joe the lawyer's pick for his episode of the week. If you didn't catch the Wednesday night live stream at 11 o'clock, it is going viral, should I say? It's got well over 1,000 views already. And what we were discussing? What were we discussing? Ugh. Well, we were discussing um, tangentially. There was Questing Beast had a video about the shortage of DMs in the 5e community, at least in New York City, and why that is. And I'm going to throw out my thoughts as to why there's a shortage of 5 EDMs, and that would be twofold. It's a complicated, compared to the OSR, it's a complicated system to learn, and if you're going to run a game, you have to know the system fluently, especially if you're going to be running Adventurers League, which it seems like a lot of that's the organized play, right? And many 5e players, a good portion of them, come in from watching these YouTube videos where everybody thinks that these people are getting paid $1 million a year to play D&D and run D&D sessions, that's the real game. That's not a bunch of fucking actors. And that is like intimidating. It's like, I can never run anything as well as Mr. Mercer. The Mercer effect, right? So that, in my opinion, is if you're seeing a shortage of 5 EDMs, that's likely it. But it goes deeper than that, right? Because you only need one DM per 5 or 6 players. Now, again, and I've mentioned this before, there's a perception bias. Because the perception bias of, well, the OSR is all a bunch of 20 and 30 somethings. It's disproven from every convention that I've gone to where I've run Swords and Wizardry, or I've played in old school games, or they're old school conventions, and generally it's an older crowd. But that's my perception bias, right? It's old school game systems. It's likely that it's going to draw an old school crowd. I know what my demographics are. My viewers are not coming from 5e and making the switch. They've been old school gamers for the most part, most of their lives. So my demographics for this channel shows that. But there's something else at play here. When I know, again, this isn't everybody's group, but I had groups in Pennsylvania, in the Poconos, and in New York, and I had the home group, had the college group, and generally, what was the situation in these groups? Well, in the Poconos, we shared the DM responsibility. We didn't have a set world, and everybody had their DM PC. Like, you ran your character from the group campaign when you were running the adventure yourself, because there's only like a handful of players. But in New York, we played everything and we ran everything, and there were multiple DMs, or GMs, I should say. In New York, I only got to play in a D&D campaign once, only lasted a few sessions. Otherwise, D&D was my bag. Okay, that was it. Given to me. Somebody else would run riffs. Somebody else would run whatever. D&D was what I ran. That's what the group was comfortable with. That's what they expected. Now, in my older years, in my coming back to gaming, in the OSR, I'm in a group where everybody's a GM. Everybody, we take turns. The people in this group I've known for years, and I've played in everybody's campaign at some point, and they all played in mine. So my perception is that the OSR doesn't have a shortage, and it's not because necessarily it's a simpler system. I think it's a different mindset. It's an older mindset. We've been playing longer. We're less intimidated by the games, right? If you're new to gaming, DMing is intimidating. If you've been doing it for 40 years, it's probably not all that intimidating. Maybe you don't enjoy it. Maybe that's why you don't want to do it. But there's also um, the issue of self-selection or somebody else doing a self-selection. What do I mean by that? Uh, Going back a number of years to the beginning of Contessa. I remember the first Contessa, first online convention for it. Contessa was there to empower women. A great idea. And the idea was only women could be the GMs. Anybody could play, but only women could sit in the GM seat. And then the complaint was there wasn't enough GMs to fill the seats. And why aren't more women looking to GM? Well, you know, at the time, I don't know hard numbers, but even now, in general, women make up less members of the gaming community than men. But at the very least, you're cutting out a half, maybe 2/3 of your potential GMs when you say only women. Now, is that what's going on in 5e? No, but I think a lot of the issue is, well, GMs in 5e, this is my experience in talking with members of the 5e community, is that they expect 5e in general to be run by the book. If you're playing OSR games, if somebody gives you a bunch of house rules for how they're running Swords and Wizardry, you're kind of like, oh yeah, no problem. Oh, that's how you do like a skill check. All right, yeah. Oh, that's how you're doing initiative. Okay. With 5e, everybody expects to get something. Especially playing Adventurers League, it has to be by the book. Now, why do I make house rules? Usually my house rules are there to make things simpler for me, to make my experience as a GM easier.
So the rules are too cumbersome.
Well, 5e rules, Rach. Well, Rach, when we were at the at ShireCon, how many pages was your character sheet?
It was many pages.
It was about 8 to 10. I think mine was 8, but you had spells, so yours was potentially longer than mine.
Yeah, there was so much I didn't know what to do with most of it.
Right, now that's as a player.
As you know,
yeah,
somebody who's not.
Right, but as a player, you're presented with potentially an overwhelming amount of information. As a GM, as a DM, imagine having to be.
That's the thing. You have to have all that information and be able to, guide people through it and like help them understand what they can and can't do.
And keep the storyline going and keep the pacing going. Because
it's a lot of work.
Folks, GMing isn't simply abdicating rules. It's pacing. It's getting people to make a decision. It is getting the game moving. It is improvising. It is allowing your players to think out of the box. It's multifaceted. And one aspect we don't always talk about, and probably could be a whole episode on its own, is that GMing is pretty much a skill. One of the skills that part of it is to get a group, often of strangers at a convention, to come to group decisions. This is great when it comes to like real life jobs, if you think about it. So it's a great skill. But yes, a more cumbersome system means that more is expected from you as a GM to have that knowledge. I could run Swords and Wizardry Light, 4 pages. I don't run it all by my head. Swords and Wizardry Continual Light, 17, 18 pages. Again, I wrote it. I probably don't need to look at the rules. 5e, I'll play the game of 5e, but I'm not going to run it. And I think that's the issue with the 5e side of this coin, is that people are willing to learn enough of the mechanics and the character class that it's important to them, that applies to them. They're not necessarily looking to learn everything for a system that is that heavy. Whereas with most OSR games, and that doesn't apply to all, Hyperborea is a huge game, right? DCC is a huge game. Then you take out the charge and it's not so huge. But Labyrinth Lord, OSE, Swords and Wizardry, Osric. Once you've figured it out, they're all the same. To some extent, it's the same thing with 5e. But my experience with 5e, I've run 2 convention games for groups that were composed of 5e players, is that they expect that there is a rule that applies to nearly everything. They don't like, since they don't like that, they're not necessarily as comfortable as OSR gamers are with the DM making a fiat decision. It's a bit out of the wheelhouse for our comfort zone. Now, the idea that running an OSR campaign is as simple as just getting a few random dice together and into maps and let the players wander off. I've played in sandbox or hex crawl campaigns, and the amount of behind the scenes work that goes into prepping for this stuff is out of this world. I mean, the detail that you need before the session to make that work is amazing. I have run hex crawls that have been published professionally. I didn't prepare them, but I played in ones that were, but the author was my DM. The amount of work that goes on behind the scenes is immense. But even if you're just running somebody's published hex crawl, you need to know it well enough that when your players zig as opposed to zag, you still know what's coming up. You still know what's in the future, right? You know you're not caught by surprise. So it requires preparation. It requires a strong party that an all-star party that isn't into a hex crawl or sandbox isn't going to go anywhere. It's going to be a bad experience for everybody. So it isn't necessarily easier because it's just throw down a map and let them pick a direction. I believe it's easier to be comfortable as an OSR GM because the rules aren't, as Rach put it, as cumbersome and they aren't as restrictive. So the DM is a bit more empowered in an OSR game, and that's a DM by nature. I enjoy that. I like that. 5e, my perspective, yours may be different, is a lot more restrictive than the OSR in most OSR games. And I'm sure one D&D is going to be even more restrictive. One D&D is going to have a rule for everything. We shall see. So I just wanted to cover that real quick. Tonight, 8 p.m., the random party generator. So guess what? Rob Conley, Joe the Lawyer, maybe a few others will be on tonight at 8 p.m. on this channel, Eastern Time. And I don't know, maybe we'll pick up where we left off on Joe's channel. By the way, like I said, Joe's channel and others are at the tenkarstavern.substack.com. It's a weekly newsletter, but it's also a website. You can go there and see what was up for last week. Folks, we are in the middle of an endemic or triple endemic or whatever. Use your common sense. All right? We'll leave it at that. Be safe, be well. God bless. Roll those dice, roll them well. Again, I'll be back again 8 o'clock tonight. And tomorrow, Gamers Health, 8 p.m. Eastern. All right, folks. Later.